guys, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to the Wandering Reader. Today I'm going to be doing my June wrap up. In the month of June I read 8 books, which I was really happy with, so we're going to talk about all of those books that I read. Let's jump in. First up, I listened to on audio The Secret Barrister, Stories of the Law and How It's Broken, and this is by The Secret Barrister. Like I said, I listened to this one on audio through my library service. It's a non-fiction book that I have seen a few people read on BookTube or sort of talk about, so I thought I would give it a go, sort of in the vein of, you know, Adam Kay's This Is Going to Hurt and some of the other books that have come out recently about some of the professions within the sort of civil service or whatever, and sort of unveiling what it's like basically. So this one is a series of experiences basically from somebody who is a barrister in the UK, and they talk about what it's like to be a barrister, how you train, the different processes in a court of law, what different courts of law are. So there's a lot of information in there that I didn't really know anything about before, like what's the difference between criminal court and other types of court, and then like, I don't know, like going to the Old Bailey versus going to your local magistrate's court, like what was the difference in those kinds of things. But I say he because it's narrated by a male whose name is Jack Hawkins, and they talk about their experiences of being a barrister in lots of different cases, and a lot of it was basically what's wrong with the criminal justice system in the UK, how it's really underfunded, that often justice isn't served in the way that the public wants it to be a lot of the time because of underfunding, and some other reasons as well. And they also talked about the fact that you know, we very much have this idea I suppose in the Western world of what we think justice should be. We think that, you know, if you lock somebody away for the crime that they have committed, then that is justice. Or, you know, in certain states in America, if people are killed via the death penalty. But they were talking about the fact that there are other ways of dealing with people who commit these crimes, and often the reasons why they're committing crimes is really what we need to be dealing with rather than the actual crime itself. You know, why did they go and do that in the first place? And if you're sort of tackling the root of the problem, then you're less likely to have, you know, so many people in the UK prison system. Yeah, I found it interesting. I found it quite gloomy. I think it could have been balanced out a little bit more by the good that's being done in the criminal justice system, and they did tell some stories of particular people that they had worked with, but again I just kind of felt like they were quite negative a lot of the time, and I'm not necessarily saying that that's not the reality of the system and exactly what it's like, but I kind of feel like there are two sides to jobs like this. Like, I'm a teacher, and there can be days where it's really frustrating that the education system in the UK is underfunded, that schools don't get enough money for the things that they need, that buildings are falling apart, that, you know, some students now aren't getting extra services that they might have got in the past and things like that. That's really frustrating, obviously. But on the other hand, there's this really lovely positive side to the job where you get to work with young people every day and, you know, mould them and help them to, you know, build futures and open doors for them, and that's like the real positive side of the job. And I just kind of feel like this book wasn't really balanced. I kind of feel like there must have been a lot more that could have been said about the positive aspects of the job, about why they do it, and those kinds of ideas. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I gave it 3.5 stars in the end. Next up, my first book for the summer romance book bingo was Closer to You by Jill Sanders. This is a book about Tyler and Kristen. Tyler has just taken over the family oil business. His father died a few months ago, and him and his 3 brothers are now in charge of the business, although he is in charge primarily and he's trying to build it back up again. Kristen works for a company, I think in New York, or certainly in a really big city in America, that kind of buys other companies and kind of breaks them apart, redistributes them. It reminded me a little bit of what Richard Gere's character does in Pretty Woman, like that kind of idea. So she works for a company like that, and she is sent over to Montana, where Tyler's company is, with the intention to persuade him to buy the company. And she, you know, she's this big city girl. She's got a really expensive wardrobe. She's spent an awful lot of time climbing the corporate ladder, you know, building her career, accumulating really lovely things, that kind of idea. And she arrives in Montana, and I think her world is kind of turned upside down a little bit. I think she starts realising, you know, some of the motivations behind that and things like that. And obviously she's there to persuade Tyler to sell his dad's company, or his company now, and he doesn't want to, and it's about the relationship that develops between the two of them. I'd never read anything by Jill Sanders before, and this is the first book in her Haven Montana series, and I believe the next books in the series are going to follow Tyler's 2 brothers. I really enjoyed it. It was a good start to summer romance book bingo, and like I said, I enjoyed Jill Sanders' writing. There were lots of steamy moments in this book, and they were well written, but it wasn't just about the romance. It was also, there was a lot of suspense in here. There were a lot of sort of issues surrounding the company and the town that it was in, and you know, they had this whole thing going through it about, you know, small towns versus big cities and that kind of idea, and the idea of family being really, really important. Yeah, and I ended up really enjoying this. I gave it 3.75 stars. I will definitely continue on in the series, and I look forward to reading more stuff by Jill Sanders. Next up, I read the 3rd book in the O'Neill Brothers series. This is Maybe This Christmas by Sarah Morgan. Not particularly the right time of year to be reading this, but it was on my TBR. You know, I'm reading everything that Sarah Morgan has written, and I've loved this series so far, and the 3rd book wasn't an exception to that. This follows another man called Tyler. He's the 3rd brother in the family that own the ski resort, the Snow Crystal ski resort, and at the beginning of the trilogy it was very much about the fact that this business was dying. It needed to be turned around, and you know, the whole series has kind of been focused around that kind of idea. Tyler was an ex sort of ski champion until he had an accident which meant that he couldn't do it anymore, so he's been home for a year or so, or I think maybe a little bit less than that, basically trying to get his life back on track, and also learning to live with and help and sort of raise his teenage daughter called Jess, who her mum kind of sent her to live with him after she had another baby, and she basically didn't want to see Jess anymore. So he's kind of obviously having to raise her as well. And then you've got Brenna, and Brenna is Tyler's best friend. They've known each other since they went to school together, and Brenna has been in love with Tyler ever since she can remember, but she's never done anything about it because she doesn't want to ruin their friendship, and also she thinks that he doesn't see her like that, that he is much more interested in girls that are a lot more beautiful and glamorous than she is, or women I should say. So she just, you know, doesn't think it's worth pursuing, and it's about the relationship between the two of them. I said in a video that I did, I think it might have been my mid-year book freakout tag, that I kind of was able to put my finger on a little bit more why I love Sarah Morgan's later books so much. I really feel like she's an expert at building romantic tension, and she's an expert in you're writing believable characters and making you believe in a relationship, and but it also being really interesting to read at the same time. It's real escapist fiction for me, definitely. I loved this book just like I've loved all of the rest of this series and her latest series as well. And I gave this one 4 stars. Next up on audio, I listened to Eat Up, Food, Appetite and Eating What You Want by Ruby Tando. This book had been recommended from Lauren over at Lauren at the Books. I believe she read this last year, and I think she put it on her like favourite books of the year list. This is a non-fiction book written by Ruby Tando, who was a contestant on, I think she was a finalist on a recent season of the Great British Bake Off. And I absolutely love that show, so that's how I knew her. And she's brought out a couple of recipe books since that, and then this is the first sort of like writing based non-fiction book that she's brought out. She does write for a couple of websites, I think, and she has written for a newspaper as well. So she basically talks in this book about the pleasure of eating and about eating in different cultures and what eating can do for you and the different sort of properties of foods and the way that people think about food and things like that. And I think her main argument in this book is that we should be enjoying foods. Yes, it's fuel, yes, it's good for different bits of our body and things like that, but it also should be a pleasurable experience, and there's nothing wrong with it being a pleasurable experience. And that is how I've always viewed food. Yeah, pretty much, although this book did make me think afresh about how I view it. And I do know a couple of people who do just look at food as fuel, and I always feel sorry for those people in terms of, I just think they're missing out on so much. And yeah, you've got to watch your diet and you have to watch what you put in your mouth and what you're doing to your body and things like that, but at the same time, eating is such a fundamental part of our day-to-day lives that it has to be a pleasurable experience for something that you do so much of. You know, it's like sleeping. Okay, you have to sleep, but it doesn't mean that you've got to sleep on a cold hard floor every night. You know, you buy a really nice bed and you make sure it's got a nice mattress on it, and you have nice sheets and you buy nice pajamas. You know, there's an experience to be had from sleeping, as well as just the thing that's what your body needs at that particular time. And she talked about particular studies during the book where and I can't remember the institution that did the studies, but she was talking about studies that had been done about people eating a particular food and getting pleasure from it, and actually their body's absorbing the nutrients in that food much more because they've got more pleasure out of eating it, rather than a different group of people who didn't particularly like that plate of food and their bodies didn't absorb as many nutrients from it. And I found that particular study fascinating, as a really good bit of proof that actually, yeah, it should be a pleasurable experience. We should be eating things that we like. And I am, and I ask anybody that knows me, I am a really fussy eater. Well, I wouldn't say really fussy, but I would say fussy. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm not afraid to say, well, no, I don't want to eat that, I'll eat something else. Yeah, I don't, I'm not just going to settle for any kind of meal in a restaurant or any kind of restaurant in general. You know, it has to be something that I'm going to enjoy eating, otherwise I just think, what's the point, basically. So yeah, this book was a joy to listen to. It's narrated by Ruby Tando herself, and I would really recommend listening to it in audio, just because I think listening to her narrate the book adds so much to the experience of reading it. Highly recommend this one, and I gave it 5 stars. Next up, I read Virgin River by Robin Carr. This is the first book in the Virgin River series, again for my romance book bingo TBR. Again, I've never read anything by Robin Carr before, although I had started one of what I think is her later books. I can't remember the name off the top of my head now, and I wasn't that impressed by the beginning of that. I found it quite info dumpy, so I was a bit apprehensive going into this book, but I found that I enjoyed it an awful lot more than the beginning of that other book. So this tells the story of Mel, whose plan is to move to Virgin River, which is a town I don't know whether they say which state it's in, but it's like a small town in the middle of nowhere, that kind of idea. She's moving there from what I think is Chicago, because she's sick. She's a nurse and a midwife, and she's sick of dealing with medicine in a city. She feels like that she deals with too much crime, you know, too many stabbings, too many, you know, abusive patients, like that kind of idea. And she's also grieving for her husband who died, I think about 6 months before. Yeah, so she decides that she's just going to pack up her life, start again in a small town. She's found this job in Virgin River. They have offered her a cabin to stay in, and there's a doctor that she's going to be working with. When she arrives in Virgin River, the cabin is not really up to living standards. You know, the drive there wasn't particularly pleasurable. She's sort of regretting the decision that she's made. She meets the local doctor. He's quite grumpy, not particularly welcoming, that kind of idea. And so she's convinced, right, well, I've got to go home then. And then a baby shows up on the door of the doctor's surgery, or the house where the local doctor lives. Somebody's dropped it off. It's clearly a newborn. They don't know whose it is. And she stays to look after it, and sort of, you know, I'm just going to stay for a couple of days, leads to a couple of weeks, and you know, and then on from there. She meets Jack. Jack is the owner of the bar / restaurant across the street from the doctor's surgery. He is a war veteran, I think sort of like Afghanistan, Iraq, and you know, he moved to Virgin River to kind of, you know, he's really into fishing and things like that. He just wanted to basically, you know, go somewhere to recover maybe from the experiences that he had. And the two of them meet, and it's about the relationship between those two. Yeah, I found the writing in this one quite good. I enjoyed the romance and the relationship between the two of them. There were some steamy moments in here, but it also dealt with some other issues as well. So it dealt with the idea of, you know, small close-knit communities, but also like these types of communities that you get in the middle of the woods who are cut off from everybody else, and whether we should trust people that are in those communities, like that kind of idea. And small community nursing and doctoring involving perhaps things that you might not expect. You know, having to drive an hour to the local hospital if, you know, a pregnancy isn't going the way that it should be going, or, you know, something goes wrong with a patient. I found that really interesting to kind of read about. Yeah, I enjoyed it. Sarah from Steeped in Books, I think, is currently reading book number 5. She really didn't enjoy book number 4. So I do want to carry on in this series. I'll see sort of how I go with it. But I enjoyed it, and what did I give that one? To look at my rating. That was 3.75 stars as well. Next up I read Logan. Was it Logan? Yeah, Logan by Linda Leal Miller. This is the first book in the Montana Creek series. It's a cowboy romance, a contemporary cowboy romance. And this tells the story of Logan. He's one of 3 brothers who's just come back to his dad's property. His dad died a couple of years ago in a sort of logging accident, and his dad wasn't a particularly nice person to begin with anyway, and Logan spent a couple of years just sort of like not wanting to be home, that sort of idea. But he comes back to pick up the family business again to sort of, you know, rebuild the family home, that sort of idea. And he meets Brianna, and Brianna is living in a house on the property that his brother sort of lent to her when he was trying to help her out. She has 2 children, and her ex-husband basically dropped her off outside with the kids outside a local Walmart and just kind of left her and never came back. She had nowhere to live. nothing basically. So he let her stay in this house, and Logan meets Brianna, and it's about the relationship between the two of them. This one took some twists and turns that I wasn't expecting. It was interesting reading about a character that had been divorced and had children. Her ex-husband shows up again in the story. It was about dealing with him and that sort of idea. And yeah, it was interesting reading about sort of like the cowboy, you know, ranching. I don't know if ranching is the right word, but like that sort of business. I like that. The relationship between the two of them was really sweet. I liked that sort of idea. Yeah, and I like Linda Liao Miller's writing, so I will definitely continue on in this series. So the next two books obviously follow the next two brothers. That's pretty typical for a romance series. Yeah, definitely going to continue on. And I gave that one 4 stars. Then again on audio, I listened to Born a Crime, Stories from a Childhood in South Africa, I think, or from Growing Up in South Africa, by Trevor Noah. Trevor Noah is a broadcaster, comedian. I haven't actually seen him on the TV at all. The reason I know about this book is from other people reviewing it on BookTube. And like you guys know, I love listening to non-fiction on audio. So I downloaded this on Audible and listened to it, and it was absolutely fantastic. It's narrated by Trevor Noah himself, and again, that just adds a whole new layer to the listening experience. I actually ordered my husband a physical copy from the library, and because I think he would really enjoy it. He doesn't listen to audiobooks. And I'd be interested to see what he thinks. But I think I got so much more out of it because it was on audio. You know, his voice, the way he does different accents, the way he tells particular stories. And it's just basically what the title says. It's about him growing up in South Africa. His father was white and his mother was black, at a time where that was basically illegal. And it's about his experience of sort of dealing with different people and how they reacted to him, you know, and his mother as well. You know, he talks about his abusive stepfather, he talks about his experiences at school, but he also talks about the typical things about growing up, you know, and becoming an adult. You know, his love life, his experience of romance as a teenager, not always going the way that he would want it to, as happened to probably all of us when we were growing up. So he had some funny stories to tell on those kind of fronts. Yeah, I absolutely loved this book. If you haven't read it, you are missing out. You really need to read it. I loved it and I gave it 5 stars. Next up from the library, I read Dare She Date the Dreamy Doc by Sarah Morgan. This is the 4th and final book in the Glenmore Island Doctors series. This one follows Ryan and Jenna. Ryan is the new doctor on the island, and Jenna is going to be the new nurse. She's moving to the island with her daughter, her teenage daughter. She's just recently got divorced from her husband, who cheated on her and then basically sold the house from under her feet, so she had nowhere to go. So she decided, I want to start again basically, and, you know, move somewhere where nobody knows me and where, you know, nobody knows the heartache that I've gone through recently, and I can just start again basically. She meets Ryan, who's a doctor, and it's about the relationship between the two of them. And most of the book focuses around her wrestling with herself about the fact that, you know, she can't really be in a relationship with him because it's not been that long since she got divorced. But the main thing is that she, you know, has her daughter to think about. What's her daughter going to think? You know, she's already had her world turned upside down once. Her dad doesn't really want to know her, that kind of idea. And it's sort of her wrestling with that kind of idea. Yeah, I enjoyed it. These are some of Sarah Morgan's earlier books, so they're not her best, but it was enjoyable enough. And what did I give that? I gave that 3 stars in the end, which is better than some of the other books in the series that I gave a slightly lower rating to, but I enjoyed it. Lastly, I read Do You Want to Start a Scandal by Tessa Dare. This is the 4th book in the Castles Ever After series, and I've read all of those books now. And then it's also the 5th book in the Spindle Cove series, and I've not read anything from the Spindle Cove series so far. But, you know, whatever, I'm gonna have to go back basically and do that. So basically, at the beginning of this book, a woman called Charlotte goes to see somebody called Lord Granville, and they're at this ball at this particularly nice house, and they're staying at this house for a couple of weeks, and Charlotte's mother is a massive matchmaker. She really wants her to marry somebody who is highly regarded in society and is going to set her up for life, but she sometimes makes Charlotte do things or puts her in situations that have been really embarrassing, and she's developed a bit of a reputation in the country for being a bit of a kind of throwing herself at people, that kind of idea, even though that's never been her intention. So she goes to see Lord Granville, his name is Piers, because she wants to warn him that this is what her mother's intention is, and you know, he needs to kind of get out of there, that kind of idea. And when she's talking to him in this particular room, they hear somebody coming through the door, so he sort of drags her behind one of the curtains so that they're not seen. And then what ensues is 2 people having sex on the desk in this particular room, and after they come out, and then the two people leave, and then they come up from behind the curtains, this little boy who is the son of the owners of the house comes downstairs and basically accuses Piers of murder. His parents come in because he's shouting, and basically everyone knows that it wasn't murder because he describes it as basically it's 2 people having sex, but of course he doesn't know that it's 2 people having sex, and they think it's the 2 of them. So Lord Granville basically says that he's going to marry her, you know, that kind of idea, but Charlotte doesn't want him to because she wants to fall in love with somebody and marry somebody for love, and she kind of feels like Piers is never going to do that for her. So she's determined to solve this mystery of who these 2 people are so she can get out of this marriage sort of thing. And it's about the relationship between the 2 of them, and they fall in love. And in true Tessa Dare style, there was lots of steamy moments. It was a bit of a romp, but also it had lots of mystery behind it. It had lots of twists and turns. I really enjoyed it. I love all of Tessa Dare's writing. Yeah, and this was no exception, so I gave it 4 stars. So there you go, guys. They were all of the books that I read in June. So I managed to tick off 6 books from my... Was it 6 or was it 5? I think it's 6. Might be 5. Let me just have a little look at my list. Just go back. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, it is 6. So did I read 9 books then in June rather than 8? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. No, it was 9. I did read 9 books in June rather than 8. So yeah, I managed to tick 6 books off of my summer romance book bingo TBR. I wanted to read 8, that was my goal, but I read 6 and I think that's pretty good going, and I read 9 books overall, so I'm really pleased with that total. I'd love to have a chat with you in the comments below. Have you read any of these books, and what did you think of them, and what did you read in June? Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.